Good afternoon. I'm Jessie Hill, the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs here at the Law School. I'm here on behalf of co-deans Jessica Berg and Michael Scharf, who regret that they can't be here because they're out of town on law school business. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this year's Frank J. Battisti Memorial Lecture. Judge Battisti served on the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Ohio for 33 years, and he was chief judge for most of that time. Although he was a graduate of a well-known East Coast law school, Judge Battisti was a great friend of this law school. He hired quite a few of our graduates as his law clerks, and indeed, this lecture series came about largely because of the devotion of many of Judge Battisti's clerks who helped to endow this series. We have had an extraordinary array of distinguished lecturers in this series, both from the law and from other fields in which Judge Battisti had an abiding interest. Previous lecturers have included prominent judges, legal scholars, academics, and civil rights figures. This may be our first bishop, however. To introduce today's Battisti lecture, I present my faculty colleague, Jonathan Enton.
Thank you, Jessie. As Dean Hill mentioned, this lecture series was made possible by the generosity of many of Judge Battisti's former clerks. I know that a number of them are here, and could I ask the former clerks who are here if you could stand and be recognized? I'd also like to introduce retired Judge Diane Karpinski of the Ohio Court of Appeals for the 8th District, who was Judge Battisti's sister-in-law. Judge Karpinski? Now, as Dean Hill also mentioned, we've had the wonderfully great fortune of having some notable lecturers in this series, both from the law and from other fields, many of the other fields in which Judge Battisti had strong interests. Among the previous lecturers in this series have been such prominent judges as Leon Higginbotham and Jack Weinstein, prominent legal scholars such as Lee Bollinger, Erwin Chemerinsky, and Michael Klarman, scholars from other fields such as the political philosopher Jean Bethke Elshtain, the historian of education Diane Ravitch, and sociologist Douglas Massey, who gave last year's lecture, and such notable civil rights figures as Julian Bond and Fred Gray. Another former lecturer in this series was Sister Helen Prejean, and two of Judge Battisti's other former clerks who have gone on to distinguished careers, Judge Marilyn Shea Stoneham, formerly of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Ohio Bankruptcy Court, excuse me, and Dean Frank Wu of the University of California Hastings College of the Law, just to name a few. Today's speaker adds real luster to this series. Our Battisti lecturer in 2019 is the Most Reverend Nelson J. Perez, the Bishop of Cleveland. Bishop Perez was appointed to his position by Pope Francis in June of 2017. He was installed as the 11th Bishop of Cleveland in September of last year. It is particularly fitting that Bishop Perez is part of this series. Judge Battisti was a devout member of the Roman Catholic Church who attended daily Mass at the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist downtown. Bishop Perez was born in Miami, Florida, of Cuban parents, and raised in northern New Jersey. He was ordained a priest of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia in 1989. In 1998, he was named a chaplain to His Holiness by Pope John Paul II and Prelate of Honor in 2009 by Pope Benedict XVI. In June 2012, Bishop Perez was named Auxiliary Bishop of the Diocese of Rockville Center, New York. Bishop Perez has taught courses in religion and psychology at La Salle University and has traveled within the United States offering courses and conferences on evangelization, lay ministry, leadership development, retreats, and parish days of recollection. A member of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Bishop Perez serves as chair of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Cultural Diversity in the Church, as well as the chair of the Bishops' Subcommittee for Hispanic Affairs, and is a former member of the Bishops' Subcommittee for the Campaign for Human Development. Bishop Perez will speak today on immigration and the dignity of the human person. It is my honor to present this year's Battisti Lecturer, Bishop Nelson Perez.
So how many of you are lawyers? Oh, God. It's always intimidating to be in a room full of lawyers. Once a year, I get to celebrate the Red Mass, and I'm surrounded by lawyers and judges. So I come to you this morning, this afternoon, certainly not as a lawyer. In fact, I'm not even a canon lawyer. I have a bunch of canon lawyers that advise me on the law of the church. But I come to you primarily as a shepherd, as a pastor, which is at the end what I've been for all of my life in a particular way, as I was a pastor of parishes in Philadelphia and then later on now as a bishop who oversees, and I get the joy of being the shepherd of 185 parishes in Northeast Ohio. So it's a great joy to be in Cleveland. It's a great joy to do what I do. And never thought, actually, to be honest with you, never really thought that I would end up being a bishop the day that I was ordained, May 20th of 1989. But here I am, and I'm very thrilled to be here. Certainly, the word immigration is all over the place these days, right? It's in the news. It's in our conversations today. It's in the paper. It's in the State of the Union. It's all over the place. And from many different perspectives. We could speak about immigration from a legal perspective, from a political perspective. But today I'm going to speak to you on immigration more so from where the competency of the church kind of lies. The church is, at the end of the day, is not going to deal really with the politics surrounding immigration or the legal aspects directly. Though we have staff from Catholic Charities here, a bunch of lawyers and paralegals and assistants that actually do hands-on work with our immigrants here in the Diocese of Cleveland. But for me, I'll address what is my competency more, and that is as a shepherd, as a pastor, and what that all means to me. Let me begin a little bit first with my own immigration story. My family came to the United States from Cuba back in 1960. My father, who just passed away in November, was one of the youngest banking executives in Cuba at the time. He ran around. He oversaw like 25 banks all over at the age of 25, and was pretty young for that role. It was a time that while Fidel Castro had not formally come out as a communist, not totally yet, many of my father's higher level clients actually believed that was actually where it was going. And so my mother and my father, with my older brother, God rest his soul, and actually myself, though I was being carried in the womb at that point, we came to this country. We came here. About 2 years ago, I had the privilege of staying for about a little over a week at the place where Pope Francis lives. And basically, you're with him in hallways and in the dining room and in elevators. And he said one day we were in the vestibule, in the reception area of this place where he lives, and we were speaking in Spanish. And he says, "Your Spanish is pretty good. Where are you from?" I said, "Well, my parents were from Cuba." And he said, "So where in Cuba were you born?" And I said, "Holy Father, I was actually made in Cuba, but unpackaged in Miami." So he liked that, because later that week I walked into the elevator, and the doors open up, and guess who's standing there? The man in white. And he says, "Here comes a little Cuban one, made in Cuba and unpackaged in Miami." He didn't forget. I'm pretty sure that when whatever happened to get my name on his desk to come to Cleveland, and they said, "Do you know this guy?" He says, "Yeah, he was made in Cuba and unpackaged in Miami." So my parents came here in the 60s, and I was born a couple months later. It was tough for them. I've heard the stories. It was really tough. They were among the first Cubans that arrived. They were received by Catholic Charities and accommodated by Catholic Charities at the time. The bank my father worked in was a bank owned by a guy named Julio Lobo, who was probably one of the richest guys in Cuba in terms of sugar refineries. And that guy bought an apartment building, I understand, in Fort Lauderdale, and initially put his guys there to live, and got them jobs selling Domino sugar door to door. My father eventually moved us all to North Jersey, right, literally across the river from Manhattan. I grew up right around the Hudson River, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. And my father went to NYU to learn English, started working as a teller in a bank in New York, and eventually retired as an executive vice president of a bank. So he started his whole life all over again, him and my mom. They left their home that day in 1960. Technically, they came here on vacation, just never went back. So the reason to get out was they were coming on vacation, and then came here and asked for political asylum. And they left their homes that day, their home the way you left your homes this morning. Imagine, never going back, just with the stuff that you carried for a weekend or something. And they never went back. Over the years, many of my mom's family started coming here. My mom had 12 siblings. Most of them were all political prisoners in Cuba, from 1 month to 18 years. So I have an uncle in Madrid who fundamentally, for being against the communist regime and for being Catholic, frankly, he was a political prisoner 18 years. Lives in Madrid now. His high school sweetheart waited for him for 18 years, and they got married like a month after he was just released. There was no prep. They just took him out and put him on a plane and sent him to Spain. And that's the way it kind of happened. He was originally sentenced to death and then commuted to life imprisonment. He was all over places in Cuba. And many of my uncles, including my mother's sister, my godmother, who was a daughter of Charity of St. Vincent de Paul, the ones that wore remember the flying nun? Those that wore the, I don't know what, that cornet or something they called it. And even she was in a political prisoner for a while. And so my parents came here because they wanted a better life for their two kids. My older brother, David, who passed away 11 years ago, doctorate in psychology, clinical psychologist, and for me, who was in the womb, At the time, she didn't know if I was a boy or a girl. She didn't know what was going to happen to me eventually. She didn't know I was coming to Cleveland, 50-something years later. But they came here in search of, they didn't want to come here, to be honest with you. They always told me that. In fact, when they came, they came thinking that they were going back. They came thinking that, the United States is going to take care of this. This is just for like a month. The month turned into decades. All right, so they didn't come here because they made a choice to come here. They came here because, in a sense, the circumstances in their country pushed them out, as eventually pushed out, millions of people from there. They weren't, by and large, they weren't treated all that well, initially. My father told me stories of walking into stores and had signs at the time. They don't do it now, but obviously. But at the time, it said no Cubans or dogs allowed. It was a different era. It was a different time. And so that's my story. I would ask you to reflect also why your family came here, because at the end, unless you're an American Indian, you came from someplace else. Now you personally might have not come, but you might be second, third, fourth generation of you weren't like, you didn't appear here out of nowhere, right? So unless you're an American Indian, you came from someplace else. You came from someplace else, and it's always good to think about what made the people in your life make the decision to come here. What were the circumstances? What were they looking for? Did they just wake up one morning and decide they wanted to come here? Like all of us, at the end, whether it was ourselves or whether it was those that came before us in our families, our significant people in our lives, came here because they were either looking for something better and at the same time trying to run away from something bad, whatever that was. And it was different in different places and different stories. But at the end, none of us or the people that came before us would have wanted to leave our homes. My parents did not really want to leave Cuba. They really thought they were going back. And when the Bay of Pigs thing happened, they were like packing. This was temporary. This is for a while. This is until that gets, fixed up over there. And they thought it would be just a little while. So it's good to remember where we come from and why those who came before us, why they came here, because that's part of our human story, but it's also then part of the human story of the people we are now having to serve and walk with, immigrants from all over the place. So many times I get asked, well, why is the church so interested in immigration and the reality of immigration? Like, why don't you just say mass and go and do your thing? Well, part of it is that for the Catholic heart, it is part of saying the mass, right? It's connected. It's connected, and migration and immigration in the world has always been part of human history. Always been part of human history. Today, over 67 million people are away from their homes. 67 million people around the world. And they're away from their homes not because they chose to. They're away from their homes because of violence and war. Sometimes it's natural disaster, some lack of resources, extreme poverty. 23 million of those people are out of their countries. out of their countries. Not only did they leave their home, but they are away from their countries. And many living in pretty dire circumstances. So is this really just a political and economic and a cultural issue? For the church it isn't. For the church, this is not, it's not political, it's not economic, it's not really a cultural issue, it's a human issue. It's a human reality. And that's what's at the heart of all of our stories, right? At the heart of our stories is the human person. And that's where the interest and the heart of the church lies. And so I'd like to look at a little bit about this topic of immigration, not legally, that's not my competency. Not politically, that's not my competency either. But from the human perspective, from the perspective of a person. Fully knowing that it is a polarizing in our world today, super polarizing. Anytime I make any statement, but anytime I make statements in particular about immigration, I get canonized and crucified all at the same time. Now, my communications people, I told them, don't tell me. No, you read it. If I need to duck, just tell me to duck. That's all I need to know. But every time I make a statement one way or the other, it is, whoa. And it's almost 50-50, they tell me. It's almost 50-50. Ohio is definitely a swing state, right? 50-50. 50% of they call, they write me letters. Some are saying, oh, it's great that you're speaking out, and others are saying, how dare you? All at the same time. All at the same time. And sometimes it's, well, who do I listen to? Who do I listen to? Well, in reality, I don't listen to either. I listen to what is at the heart of the ministry and the charity of the church. That's what I listen to. Some like it, some don't. Some don't. Actually, are very offended by it. If you look at it from the scriptural perspective, if you go to the Bible, or the Quran or the New Testament, well, what do you find? You find movement. You find people being displaced all the time. You find the people of Israel being exiled several times. And at times wandering the desert and with a hope of entering a better land, a promised land. Moses at the end never got to enter. Never got to enter. Saw it from a distance. Saw it from a distance. But they were a wandering people. The people of Israel lived many times as homeless aliens. Homeless aliens, someplace else. And sometimes their experience was so horrible that it was instilled, their experiences were instilled in their heart. And God wrote that experience in their heart so they would remember. They would remember. The book of Leviticus says, you shall treat aliens who reside with you no differently than the native born among you. Have the same love for him as for yourself, for you too were once aliens in the land of Egypt. So their experiences marked their soul and reflected in their scriptures. If you look at the Muslim people, well, they even see themselves as migrants temporarily here on earth, just like the Jewish and the Christian people do, that we are in passing. We really are in passing. Though we live our days as if it's going to be like this all the time, right? But we all know that that's not true. That actually is not true. That we are literally passing through. We are passing through. And the older you get, the more you realize how really short time is, right? And how fragile it really is, that it's come and it's gone, right? I'm already 2/3, I'm already 75% through my career. And I'm only like 57, right? And in 18 years, I get to hand in my letter. You know? It's like it's incredible. It's 30 years later after I was ordained a priest, and now I'm 75% done. 75% done. Time does really, really fly, and we can't capture those moments again. You know, once they come, they're gone. You can't relive them again. And the Jewish and Christian and Muslim concept of time is that it's fleeing, and that we are really on a journey. You know, we're all migrants, whether we want to accept it or not. And if you don't truly understand that, trust me, one day you will, right? And you'll say to yourself, "Oh, that's what he meant. This is what he meant. This is what he meant back in the day in 2019." For Christians, this migration story is really at the heart, right from the get-go, right? You know, Mary and Joseph they're constantly, for a while there, they're constantly on the move. They're constantly migrating. They're going here, they're going there. They had to go to Bethlehem to register. They were from Nazareth. They had to go to Bethlehem, and it wasn't an easy trek, let me tell you. You know, I was in Israel a year ago now, a little over a year ago, and I went from Bethlehem to Nazareth, you know, on an air-conditioned bus. You know, it's like, and it was, you know, about a couple of hours, I think. You know, they had to kind of walk this thing, and their journeys were not measured in miles; they were measured in days. So how many days would it take you to get there? And then from there, they had to split, and they had to go to Egypt because of danger. So then they had to migrate again, right from the get-go. And the apostles, you know, they started in you know, in Palestine area in the Middle East, and then ended all over the place. Europe, you know, up in the northern part of Spain, obviously Rome. They ended up all over the place. They left one place and went to another. It is the beginnings of this country in so many ways. Those that came to this country and settled our country came sometimes looking for opportunity in the New World, escaping danger. But you know what was present? Missionaries were present with them. And those who began to go out all the way out to the west side of this country, who did they take with them on their journey? They took people of faith. And, you know, I think California forgets, but most of their cities began as Catholic missions. Actually, they have Catholic names, right? San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Bernardino, San Diego. Who do you think these people were? You know, they started out right from the get-go because it is the nature of Christian dynamism to be really on the move, I certainly have experienced that in the last 7 years of my life. You know, this is my third diocese in 7 years. You know, I've been packing and unpacking all over. Hopefully I'm unpacked now until I'm 75. So even the presence of the church today at the border, right, down at the southern border, what do? They're present there. They shelter people. They give them water. They provide assistance. They give them a place to stay, clothes to wear. That's what they do. The church down in the border does not do that for political reasons, does not do that for cultural reasons, does it because it is at the heart of the church. It is the heart of Christianity. That's why it does it. That's why it's there. And they're there. Immigration really is our story. But it's also very much a part of the social teachings of the church. Right, going back to 1891 was the first time that Pope Leo XIII, in an encyclical called Rerum Novarum, spoke about the rights and responsibilities of people, the rights of immigrants. Talked about the right that every person has the right to work in order to survive and to support his or her family. Later on, Pius XII will, on the spiritual care of migrants, which was written right after World War II, when millions and millions of people were leaving their countries in search of survival and life. And he said in that document that every person has a right to life with dignity, and therefore a right to migrate toward that end. John the 23rd, back in the 60s, in Pacem in Terris, spoke about the right to migrate and the right not to migrate as well. That countries had an obligation to provide an environment that wouldn't force migration to. And that's a big issue, right? It was a big issue for my family, right? My family did not come here because they had nothing else to do. They came here because the circumstances developed that forced them to look for a place of safety and dignity. John the 23rd said that every human being has the right of freedom of movement and residence within the confines of their own country, and when there are just reasons for it, the right to emigrate and take up residence someplace else. John Paul II and Benedict XVI spoke constantly about the dignity and the value of each human person, and of our shared humanity. And that individual rights of each person, cannot really be overridden because of the common good either. That we need to respect that dignity. And what can we say about Pope Francis? Coming out of the gate, one of his first visits was Lampedusa, where thousands of people have died. He was given a chalice made out of wood of a sinking boat that still has a nail. I saw it. Has a nail from that boat stuck through the middle of it. And he said Mass in that chalice in Lampedusa. The story of immigration is a human story. It's your story, it's my story, it's our story, and it's a story now of thousands upon thousands of people that are in this country and would hope to come to this country looking for a better life for their families because they can't find that life where they are. It wasn't their choice, in a sense. And so we find ourselves now in this real incredible predicament. How do we balance the rights of immigrants and at the same time the right of sovereign states to protect and govern their borders? How do we balance that? Because both are true. Both are actually true. The bishops of the United States and Mexico, back actually in 2003, put out a pastoral statement called Strangers No Longer. And taken from scripture and and from the teachings of the church and the issues of their time, which are still the issues of our time, talked about some fundamental principles that should guide our discussions, our thought, our prayer, reflection, and our ministry. That people have, the principles, the first one was that people have the right to find opportunities in their own homeland. They have a right to that. We have a right to find opportunities right here in the United States. We should not have to be running, someplace else. But so does everybody else. To live, to work, and provide for our families with a spirit of freedom and dignity. That people also have the right to migrate to support themselves and their families, like my family had to do, and many of your families had to do too. So when a family can't find work to support, themselves, they might have to look. They might have to go to another country, and because of the dignity of work, rooted in the dignity of the person, that is a desire, and it's a right. It's a human right, they say. They also say that sovereign nations have a right to control their borders. Also a sovereign right. Also a sovereign right. And that laws need to take the safety of order seriously. But at the same time, need to have the balance of how to do it in a way that respects the dignity of people. The bishop said that refugees and asylum seekers should be afforded protection. That those who flee out of fear of persecution should be afforded haven, a safe haven. And many are forced to leave their countries for fear of death and harm. Human dignity and human rights of all immigrants, the bishop said, that should really be at the heart of respect, right? At the heart of respect as we look at laws and processes and borders and everything that we look at. That we need to treat people with respect. So what does the church hope, at least in the United States? That's why the church looks at, has something to say about the immigration system in the United States and says, it's broken and it needs to be overhauled because it's not just. And so the bishops in the United States have been advocating for comprehensive immigration reform forever. And it's been a hot potato forever too, right? Every time we get close to it, it blows up. Every time we get close to it, it blows up. It's almost like we want it and then we don't. It's pretty amazing, pretty amazing. But at the end, where does the church look at it? It's going to look at it from a very human perspective. Right here in Cleveland, I had a powerful experience right from the get-go. I wasn't here weeks, and it broke my heart. There was a guy, a family, he was in the paper, so I'm not saying anything that you can't go Google right now. His name is Pedro Hernandez. Married to an American, had permission to work. Actually, had working papers. So was legally working. He actually tried to do it right as much as he could, and because of that, they knew where he was, right? Because of that, they knew where he was, and what he did have to do is from time to time he had to present himself to I guess it was ICE, to present himself for check-in, so to speak, which he did faithfully for several years. Until one day he shows up and they put an ankle bracelet on him and give him a deportation order. I was there the day he was taken into custody. I was there with his wife and two of his kids and one kid that is severely disabled. I mean, severely disabled. And I was there in ICE with Sister Rita Mary and his lawyer. And I was there when he had to say goodbye to his kids and his wife. Sad. Broke my heart. And we all felt powerless. Powerless. And it's because of situations like that that the church is present. That the church is present. Immigration is an issue that really is challenging all of us in this country to re-examine our conscience, in a sense, to re-examine our soul. Currently, they tell me there are about 15,000 undocumented immigrants in the Cleveland area, in Northeast Ohio. And the largest member, ironically, they're not Hispanics. They tell me Asian. Interesting, right? We all think that they're going to deport them back over the the southern wall back to Mexico. Well, around here, it would have to be back to Vietnam or Asia. It's like they don't want to go to Mexico. If they have to go anywhere, it's not going to be Mexico, because around here, the largest number of undocumented immigrants are actually Asian. So we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work in our heart to do, as we continue to navigate the complexity of this and the balance between respecting the human person. Because at the end of the day, and I've said this before, I've gotten in trouble because I've said it, our human rights do cross borders. They really do. They come with us, right? They come with us. So human rights are not given by the state. The state has the obligation of protecting human rights. Human rights are innate to our nature. If you're a person of faith, you'll say that they are God-given. They are given to us by God. Innate to us. Rooted in our human nature. And the role of the state is to protect those rights, to defend those rights. So I'm going to stop here and see if anybody has any questions or thoughts or comments. Yes, sir.
Is it part of our role as Catholic Christians, and you taught it, to evangelize? To evangelize about what you just said. And do you evangelize? Now you're evangelizing now, but is that our role?
Our role is part of proclaiming the good news which is what that word means, right? To proclaim the good news is to proclaim the good news of the rights of the human person given to us by God, right? So how you do that and what that means, it depends, right? Right. So I do it differently, right, than Camille does, who's a lawyer and who deals with it in a very direct way. I can't do it the way she does it. I'm not barred. I don't have a license to do it even, right? So we each do it within the competency of who we are and our sphere of influence, right, and our sphere of work. But yes, part of the Christian thing has always been to lift up our prophetic voice, especially in those who can't always do it for themselves. And that's part of the good news. Yes. Yes, back there.
Bishop Perez, thank you very much for sharing your very compelling story with us. As one who was packaged in Cuba, and as you say, unpackaged here in the U.S., how do you feel about this move in our country to do away with citizenship for those who are born here?
I can't understand it. I can't understand. How could you remove, based on why? right? Based on what? How would I like it if it was done to me? Like, and all of a sudden they said to me, you know, if, because you could turn this whole Catholic thing, you know, Catholics, we assert the truth that, that I came into existence the day of my conception. But that happened in Cuba. So technically I'm undocumented, you know, in a sense. You know, it just happens where I was unpackaged. But I can't understand that. Remember Lost in Space, the robot does not compute? It just doesn't compute. You know, they're born here and you're going to remove their citizenship? Is that even legally possible? You know, the lawyers here, and you guys are smart, way smarter than me. I don't know if it's even possible. Any other thoughts or questions? Or yes, sir.
How do you think Americans should think about and deal with the very difficult issues and problems that immigrants can cause in the United States, and the problems that are engendered in terms of voting fraud, free medical treatment, free education, things of this nature? How should we analyze this, in your opinion?
I think we have to be precise, right? We have to be precise and make sure that at times, which is said, is actually true, right? So I have to begin there, right? I have to begin there. Are all those things that you listed present among some immigrants? Absolutely. And I could show you 15 other segments of American society where that's all present too, right? So to make that an immigrant issue, I think is taking a little far. You know, it's a bigger issue than it crosses. It crosses a lot of borders, right? It crosses a lot of borders. But whatever we do, at the end, though, I do believe that we should do it with a compassionate heart, because that's the way I would want to be treated, and the people I love. That's the way I would hope that they would be treated, with compassion. There was somebody over there.
Thank you very much for being here this afternoon,
Sure.
Bishop. Listening to your remarks, I get the sense that you would like to stay as far away from the fray as you can, as far as legal entanglements, et cetera. But in the world in which we live, lots of times we just don't get that luxury.
Absolutely.
And the way in which social media is being used, is being contorted. There were false statements put out by, presumably by bots, that the Pope had endorsed Trump for the presidency. Against that backdrop, what, as a pastor, do you feel you owe to your congregation to help them get accurate information?
That's a tough one, because today, on both sides of the spectrum, information is, I don't know if there is information anymore, right? I don't know, it's not Walter Cronkite's, half-hour news anymore, where the news was, this happened on such and such a day, and in such and such a time, and in such and such a way, that it was factual. I think today, in the world of 24/7 news channels, there's like 10% reporting of the news, and then 90% commenting on the 10 minutes that just of what happened. And it's hard. It's hard because even the news today is really polarized. It's polarized. I think we have a responsibility, though, to be well informed. right? And and today in the world of the 7-second soundbite and the quotable quote, any one of us could get in tons of trouble, right? Because they could, the average soundbite is 7 seconds. Boop, there it is, right? And all of a sudden, that soundbite takes a life of its own. And so I would say that we all have a responsibility to be well informed and properly informed, and that might involve that we do a little bit of research too, right? That I don't wait to just be served, but that I go also and research it myself, right? What actually happened? What actually was said? And oftentimes I get written, the Pope said this or this cat said that. I says, well, did you read his whole encyclical? No. Well, what exactly did you read? Well, the headline in a newspaper. Wow, imagine if that's the way we watch movies, right? By the title. And then somehow think that by the title, then I understood the totality of the movie. Sometimes you got to watch a movie till the very end to figure it out, right? To figure it out. That was like remember that movie, The Sixth Sense? If you left that movie halfway through the movie, you lost it. You didn't understand actually the whole movie until the very final scene. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming today. How do you, as a man of faith, reconcile the fact that, in essence, the Catholic Church espouses liberal and progressive ideas to achieve good for all, since you're from Cuba, por todos y para el bien de todos.
Mm-hmm. Muy bien.
And with the exception of abortion, this being the major exception, that in fact the Catholic Church and its followers will primarily follow conservative ideology rather than liberal ideology. Do you want to address that?
I have to be really honest with you. And people says, are you liberal or conservative? I'm neither. It depends. It depends how you choose to paint, with what brush you choose to paint. And to me, the protection of life and the dignity of life, to me, it's not a liberal or a conservative issue. It's a life issue. It's a human issue. If there's somebody sitting there that's hungry, and I want to feed that, and I say that person needs to eat, is thirsty, I need to give him water. Am I progressive or am I conservative? What am I because I'm doing that? I'm just human. Why do I have to be conservative or progressive? If we paint things, if we're going to put those columns, yeah, there'll be issues that the church will address that will fall in one side of the political spectrum, and another will fall on the other side of the political spectrum, at least in the United States, in the way we view the political realities. In other places in the world, it's not even that, There's no such thing as Republicans or Democrats in Africa, or there might be other political parties with other names. But for the church, these things are not, for you said as a person of faith, these things are not political issues for me. They're not ideological issues either. They're moral. They're moral issues. Some of them might fall one place, some of them will fall in another. And personally, it really doesn't bother me where they fall. That person needs to eat. If doing that you think I'm a liberal or a progressive, I would say, fine. But as long as that person is eating, I really doesn't bother me how you label me, right? the label really doesn't change the fact that rooted in my own Judeo-Christian values, I need to reach out to that human being. Does that make sense? And that's the way I would kind of answer it. Yes, sir.
And I guess we're waiting for this microphone.
Though you have a strong voice, though.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if you can hear me,
Now I can, yeah.
but I will tell you, I am a retired federal law enforcement officer with 30 years of having done that.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, well, thank you, but I got paid, so everything's good. But the reality is, in those 30 years, I don't know that I've ever had the occasion to arrest or prosecute an illegal alien, immigrant. But beyond that, we have a president now who suggests all of these untoward things. People, rapists are flooding the border, bringing in drugs, none of which is supported by fact. But beyond that, we have a Holy Father who is being criticized by a lot of arch conservative Catholics and some clerics. There's no question about that. But he does what Jesus does, inclusive. And my point is that with all of these issues about crime and drugs, I have no recollection of ever seeing or reading in the scriptures that Jesus ever pushed anyone away. And that's the issue. Either you accept a person or you don't. And when he came to give us an example, that's his example. So I think it's fundamentally a moral issue. People are people, and they need to be embraced. Sorry for my soapbox.
No, thank you.
I'll cede it to you now.
Thank you. Well, yeah, and that's at the end of the day, for the Christian anyway, that is the bottom line. That is the bottom line. But Jesus did stand up to that which he thought was unjust. Right? He did do that. And he did, when he had to, he turned a couple tables at the temple too. So he wasn't when I was in Long Island, we used to do these town meetings when there was a change in leadership in the parish, in the church, and so we would ask the people, what type of pastor do you want? Well, invariably, they're going to, they want Jesus Christ. So what are they going to want? And I often would say, oh, trust me, you do not want Jesus Christ as your pastor. He would irk you. He would come in and move your statues just to bother you. They didn't crucify him because he was warm and fuzzy. Really. He was a power to contend with, and he got the structures of his time really up in a tither. And he would have it in no other way. He would have it no other way. Yes? Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of pick off the last couple points. I think, as we go and make these decisions and we make political decisions, I think we would all be lucky if we could say we agreed with every single principle ever represented. And you spoke earlier of the tension between the rights to a state to enforce its border and the rights of the migrant. And so I might ask then if you have any guidance to us, many of us as lawyers or public officials, administrators or so forth, as we deal with the close questions where there's maybe not a clear answer, or there's two situations where you may see the moral merits of both sides. And so if there's any guidance you might offer.
Listen, for me, I have to be honest, it's a simplistic and a complex answer at the same time. Treat people the way you want them to treat you. How would I want to be treated as a person? As a person. Even if I did something, even if I committed a crime, I would hope that I would be treated with the dignity of my humanity. I would hope that would be my hope at the very least, right? And so while these issues get worked out in politics and in law and in courts and in all this type of stuff, in the meanwhile, listen, I know for myself, and I could only speak for myself, I'm not going to be judged on my knowledge of the political and legal aspects of this. That's not where I'm going to be judged. I'm going to be judged on the depth of the compassion and charity of my heart. That's where I'm going to be judged. Others are going to have to deal with their areas of competency. And in the meanwhile, the church will have something to say about that. And it's not that the church is getting, well, people say the church should stay out of politics. Well, if you call those things political issues. The church doesn't view them as political issues. It sees them as human issues and moral issues. And those issues are rooted really, even the church's posture is rooted in a very, very deep philosophical and theological thought. It didn't just not like, it's not just a little trend that happened today. It's rooted in a lot of theological, philosophical thought that goes back centuries, in its teaching and in its heart, in the heart of the church. But yeah, we're in it. We're in for a ride. We are in for a ride, and I think we're going to finish this ride anyway. Thank you so much.
Bishop Perez, I think you have amply rewarded all of us and built on the extraordinary tradition of this series. Before we formally adjourn, let me make one formal presentation here. This is from the School of Law of Case Western Reserve University to the Most Reverend Nelson J. Perez, Bishop of Cleveland, the Frank J. Battisti Memorial Lecture, February 7th, 2019.
Thank you.
And the bishop, there is a, thank you.
Thank you.
There will be a reception outside right after we adjourn, and I'm sure that the bishop will be happy to continue the conversation with you then. Thanks again. Thank you for being with us.